Hello, I'm Natalie Zett, and welcome to Flower in the River. This podcast, inspired by my book of the same name, explores the 1915 Eastland Disaster in Chicago and its enduring impact, particularly on my family's history. We'll explore the intertwining narratives of others impacted by this tragedy as well, and we'll dive into writing and genealogy and uncover the surprising supernatural elements that surface in family history research. Come along with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, this is Natalie, and welcome to episode 56 of Flower in the River podcast, where we are going to explore the unexpected role of fraternal organizations in the lives of those involved in the Eastland disaster. I have both wanted to get back to this topic and in equal amounts to avoid it. You see, when I started sharing stories of the Eastland disaster families other than mine, I noticed a pattern. Many victims, including the Ristow brothers whose stories launched this Eastland Chronicles series, were members of various fraternal organizations. I know you've heard the term because I have as well, but what are fraternal organizations? A fraternal organization or society is a group of individuals who come together based on shared interests, beliefs, or backgrounds, often with the aim of providing mutual support, engaging in charitable activities, and fostering a sense of community and brotherhood. Notice the emphasis on brother, no sisters mentioned here, but they do factor into this constellation as well. These organizations often have a hierarchical structure, detailed and very mysterious rituals and symbols that are unique to their group. As is often the case, this is just a very high-level overview because this is a very complicated subject. Have you ever noticed where a lot of people get together, things become complicated very quickly? I have. Anyway, that's history. But let me give you some examples of fraternal organizations, and I'm sure you've heard of at least one of these. The Freemasons. Yes, indeed. They are one of the oldest and most well-known fraternal organizations. Freemasons focus on moral and spiritual development, philanthropy, and fraternal connections. And there's another one that I met when I moved to the Twin Cities, the Independent Order of Oddfellows. That is the name, the IOOF. These names are very colorful, are they not? They were founded on the principles of friendship, love, and the truth. That's not too bad, right? The IOOF engages also in charitable work and provides support for its members. Many people grew up knowing of the Knights of Columbus. They still exist. They are a Catholic fraternal organization that focuses on charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. And the Elks Club. They are officially the Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks, BPOE. They like their acronyms. And they were originally founded as a social club. And the Elks now engage in all kinds of charitable activities and community services projects. The Rotary, that's a very prominent one. Rotary International is what it's specifically called. It's a global network of business and professional leaders who provide humanitarian service. So, going deeper, I saw that this pattern was not isolated when I started looking at the death notices of various Eastland victims. In many, not just one or two, but many of these death notices and obituaries, they made a point to mention the departed's affiliation with these not-so-secret societies. It seemed that being part of a fraternal organization was a significant aspect of their identities. I should say many of their identities. And it was significant enough, after all, to be noted in their final farewell. And this piqued my curiosity. What was it about these organizations that held such importance for people back in the dawn of the 20th century? Now, I will confess that I approached this topic with a lot of hesitations. Fraternal organizations often come wrapped in layers of controversy and mystery, particularly now. So, again, as a reminder, I'm focusing in on the turn of the century in Chicago in 1915, give or take a few years. I'm not talking about now. Plus, I had to step back from my own life and think about, did I know anybody in one of those organizations? At first, I didn't think so, but then I thought, wait a minute, I'm wrong. There is a group called the Soal. In most Slavic languages, Soal means falcon. And this was a group that my dad was a member of, and I am also a member of the Soal. And it does fall under the umbrella of a fraternal organization, even though women are included, obviously. And the Soal was founded in Prague, Czech Republic, in 1862. And the Soal was important and is important for so many of us of Czech and Slovak, as well as Russian ancestry. And at the Soal Tears Hall in Cleveland, it offered fellowship, physical fitness programs, a sense of belonging, and I think very inexpensive lunches, which is why my dad was often there. As we explore the intricate wave of fraternal organizations and their impact on the working class communities in Chicago, we go into a world where these types of organizations shaped lives, politics, and even the way that people faced tragedy. This is more than just a story about clubs. It's about how these organizations helped forge communities, similar to the discussions we've been having about synagogues and churches. These organizations also provided solace and perhaps a home away from home. And definitely the working class was a big part of it, but it wasn't exclusive either. These organizations are as diverse and as mixed as can be. So it's not a single unifying thread that unites them all. They're all really different. And within those umbrellas of organizations such as the Odd Fellows, there are lodges and other subgroups that might operate very different from one another. For now, picture Chicago in 1915, and as you know, it's already a big mix of cultures, ideas, and social movements. And among these fraternal organizations stand as beacons for many in the working class. My question has always been, what made these organizations more than just social clubs or mere sidelines to the political arena? To start, fraternal organizations were also about power and power to advance in the workplace, not all the time, but some of the times. And it also gave people of the working class the opportunity to build cross-class networks. That's very unique to these organizations in the United States. And Freemasonry, for example, wasn't just a club where people could go and hang out and do secret rituals. It was oftentimes a bridge and sometimes even a shield. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Beyond the tangible benefits, fraternal organizations wielded something less visible but equally potent. They weren't just groups. They were custodians of a shared identity, stewards of rights that bound them. And this aspect of fraternalism, though it's really hard to quantify, was central to its character and appeal, particularly if you envision that group of working class individuals, many of whom worked for Western Electric at that point, and Again, many, not all, but many were immigrants or first generation immigrants. So they're still seeking their identity and opportunity in this new environment and trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. So many of them, of course, belong to their churches and their synagogues. But beyond that, what could they do to advance in the world in which they were living? So these shared practices, they did a lot more than just unite members. They defined a collective identity rooted in gender and race and subtly sidelining class distinctions. And in doing this, they maintained that class boundaries were, in essence, irrelevant, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. Now, was this always the case with every organization? Of course it wasn't. They were segregated. They were basically male dominated, but not entirely. But within those groups, there was that working class with white collar class and other classes who were mingling. So they had an opportunity to break down some of the barriers while ironically constructing other barriers. What I'm going to do is share with you some of the research I've uncovered this week. And here's a warning. It is not conclusive. It's contradictory, as with much of what I shared, but this one really takes the cake. One of the scholars, and that would be Marianne Clausen, who wrote an article, Fraternal Orders and Class Formation in 19th Century United States. She says that the story of fraternal orders is twofold. While they fostered community and solidarity, they also represented a division in American class politics, a split between the workplace and community life. Each had its own vocabulary, its own institutions, work, class, trade unionism on one side, community, ethnicity, local parties, churches, and yes, fraternal orders on the other. So that's what was going on. And it was particularly pronounced in the beginning of the 20th century. Let's take a look at some specifics, okay? The publication of the Chicago Directory of Lodges and Benevolent Societies in 1893 highlighted the popularity of fraternal societies in Chicago during the late 19th century. It listed various kinds of Masons, Odd Fellows, Knights of Pythias, let's say that again, Knights of Pythias, the Elks, and many others catering to different ethnicities, religions, and interests. By the way, this is from the Encyclopedia of Chicago. I'll continue. For immigrants in particular, these organizations were crucial. They provided a sense of community, preserved cultural traditions, and they offered economic support through mutual aid and advancement opportunities and fostered civic engagement. The Masons, with their emphasis on universal brotherhood and charity, were especially attractive. In the extremely diverse communities of early 20th century Chicago, where immigrants from around the world came seeking opportunities, these organizations were pivotal. They helped shape the social fabric of the city, contributing to its rich multicultural heritage and aiding countless individuals and families in their transition to American life. And I can't go on without saying that there were the established groups of people who were already in Chicago and other cities, some of whom may not have been as welcoming to these newcomers, some of whom were very welcoming. It really depended on a variety of factors. And they were also members of these established fraternal organizations as well. So again, it's a lot more dynamic than what I'm portraying here. And for many victims of the Eastland disaster, their fraternal affiliations were a key part of their identities and the way their communities remembered them. The coming together of Masonic lodges and churches at their funerals speaks to the significant role these organizations played. How about if I share some of these obituaries with you so you can hear what I'm talking about? Most of them are from the 31st July 1915 issue of the Chicago Tribune. And let's see how well we do at decoding them. By we, I mean me. Some of them were very challenging, but let's go. The first ones are for Nelson and Roy Peterson. Peterson, Nelson R., 46 years old, and Roy, 4 years old, father and son, 1423 South 50th Avenue. They are survived by Mrs. Viola, 25 years old. Mr. Peterson was foreman of tapping department at the Western Electric Plant, also a member of River Jordan Lodge of IOOF and Masonic Order. Masonic funeral held Wednesday. Okay, so the IOOF that is mentioned is the Independent Order of Oddfellows. The IIOF has a rich history dating back to 17th century England. It was founded, again, on the principles of friendship, love, and truth. I keep sharing that because that's the idealized form of these organizations. They start off as a very good thing, and I think they want to do good things. The Oddfellows aimed at providing a support system for members in times of need, such as sickness, death, or financial hardship. And that would really come into play during that time of 1915 Chicago, when social services that you and I take for granted either didn't exist or they were still in their infancy. And in the United States, the Oddfellows became one of the largest fraternal orders by the 19th century, and they were known and valued for their philanthropic efforts, such as establishing residences, homes for the vulnerable of our society, the older generations, as well as orphan children. The River Jordan Lodge mentioned would have been a local chapter of the IOOF where members would meet, plan community service activities, and support one another. The Masonic Order, or Freemasonry, of course, I think most people know that one by reputation. It's one of the world's oldest secular fraternal organizations with roots that can be traced back to the late 16th and 17th centuries. And I have to say that pinning down the historical references for the Masons is more challenging than what I would have ever thought. But there are a variety of scholars, people who have studied this and have written about this. They don't always agree, but that just means there are a lot of resources, a lot of research that has been done, and probably a lot of research that has yet to be done. Just stay tuned and see what happens. Freemasons are known for their elaborate rituals, symbols, and emphasis on moral and ethical improvement, charity, and community service. The Masonic funeral mention suggested that Mr. Peterson was a Freemason in good standing, as Freemason funerals are special services offered to Masons. The service includes certain rites and is often conducted by the lodge's members. So both of these organizations, the Oddfellows and the Masons, focus on community service, moral improvement, and support for fellow members. In the language of today, you might say that these organizations wanted people, primarily men at that point, to become the best versions of themselves. So in that respect, there's nothing new. It's just the way that they went about it. And it's something that we can relate to. Oh, and I don't want to forget that Mr. Peterson was the foreman of the tapping department at Western Electric. In the context of manufacturing during the early 20th century, I'm guessing that tapping could refer to several possible processes. Given the time period and the company's focus, the tapping department would have been responsible for creating threaded holes in parts of telecommunication devices, or possibly in the process of making connections within electrical circuitry or components. This kind of work would have required skill and attention to detail, ensuring that parts fit together perfectly to provide reliable and functional equipment. Moving on, we do have a woman represented, and her name was Louise Thompson. Thompson, Louise M., 21 years old, 2233 South Springfield Avenue, a cashier for the Western Electric Company. She was born in Chicago and graduated from the William Penn School. She took active interest in the work of the Order of the Eastern Star and the Daughters of Rebecca, to which she belonged. She is survived by her mother, Mrs. Susan Thompson, a sister, Bertha, and 3 brothers, Rudolph, Herbert, and Hugh Thompson. Funeral was from the home and burial at Concordia. Louise Thompson, as described, being an active member of both the Order of the Eastern Star and Daughters of Rebecca, was involved in 2 significant fraternal organizations. Now, once again, as I was researching these organizations, I found a lot of information that contradicted itself, but I will try to present a balanced portrait of these 2 fraternal organizations. The Order of the Eastern Star, OES, is a Masonic-related fraternal organization that is open to both men and women. It was established in the United States in the mid-19th century, and the membership is open to men who have reached the level of master in the Mason organization. I am unsure what that means. And then it's open to their female relatives, spouses, and descendants. This organization is also known for its philanthropic efforts, including scholarships and support for Mason-related youth organizations. The Eastern Star provides its members with opportunity for community service, charity work, and social fellowship. I'm going to repeat this over and over again because that is in the description of all these organizations. The Daughters of Rebecca, which Louise was also part of, they're sometimes just called the Rebeccas. They were created to allow women to participate in social and charitable work of the order. Like the OES, the Rebeccas focus on community service, supporting various charities, and promoting friendships among its members. And how these organizations interacted with each other, say, in Louise's case, she was a member of the Order of the Eastern Star and Daughters of Rebecca. Again, so the Eastern Star organization is a Mason-related organization, and the Daughters of Rebecca are part of the Oddfellows. Why did she feel the need to belong to both? And how did these 2 groups work together, or did they? I don't know. So that's another question I would have if I would go deeper into this type of study. We will continue. Our next person is Peter Weth. That's W-E-T-H. Might have been pronounced Vet. Vth Peter, 40 years old, 2621 Haddon Avenue, was the sole support of his wife and 8 children, the eldest of whom is 17. He was a foreman for the Western Electric Company and one of its older employees. He was a member of the Polish National Alliance and the Foresters. The funeral was held Tuesday, July 27th, from the residence to Holy Trinity Church. Interment was at St. Adalbert's Cemetery. Peter was Roman Catholic, and yet the member of a couple of fraternal organizations as well. The Polish National Alliance, PNA, was founded in 1880 and it is still in existence and is one of the oldest and most significant Polish fraternal organizations in the United States. Originally established to serve the needs of Polish immigrants, the PNA has a rich history of providing its members with financial protection, cultural identity preservation, and social support. And I can only hope his family got some of that from the PNA. The Foresters, that's interesting. The Foresters refers to another fraternal organization officially known as the Independent Order of Foresters, IOOF. The Foresters started out in the 19th century, and they were all about providing their members with insurance and mutual aid, similar to other fraternal organizations of the time, but with a keen focus on the welfare and financial security of its members. The IOF has a rich history of community service, supporting various charitable activities and promoting physical and mental health among its members and broader community. They're like a big, supportive family, offering everything from insurance products to scholarships and community-building activities. The connection between membership in both the Polish National Alliance and the Foresters isn't surprising, especially in areas with significant Eastern European immigrant populations like Chicago. So many immigrants and first-generation Americans joined multiple fraternal organizations to maximize their social and financial support networks. I've read a couple articles that have said this. These organizations, of course, helped preserve cultural identity and provided crucial assistance in navigating the challenges of life in a new country. They were cornerstones of community life. Especially, again, when you think about the social services we have now, those didn't exist back then. And our next obituary is that of Charles Pierce. Pierce, Charles F., 47 years old, 5241 Burtnow Avenue. He leaves destitute his wife, Mrs. Anna, and one son, Harry, 20 years old, who has been attending the Northwestern University. He was foreman of the assembling department at the Western Electric plant, having been with them for 25 years. He was a member of the Masonic Lodge at Logan Square. Funeral Tuesday at 3 o'clock from the home on Burtnow Avenue to Mount Olive Cemetery. Knights Templar and 100 Masons officiated at the grave. So Charles Pierce, his family, they don't look as if they were recent immigrants to Chicago, but I need to do a little more digging on that. I hit some brick walls on this journey. But he was a member of the Masonic Lodge at Logan Square in Chicago, and he was a long-time member, as indicated by the number of people who showed up at his funeral. I mean, 100 Masons officiating. That might have been something. I wish we could have seen that or been privy to that. And so he was very entrenched in this, and we don't know how. We just see, again, the evidence of those who honored him. Now, the Knights Templar. I know. Again, we're back in 1915 Chicago. This is not current time. So this is a branch of the Masonic Order, and it's known for its historical references to the medieval Christian military order. The Knights Templar within Freemasonry is part of the York Rite, one of the several rites within the organization that members can choose to follow for further degrees of membership. Now, according to the descriptions I've read in several places, the Knights Templar focuses on Christian themes and chivalric symbolism. And their involvement in this funeral service suggests that Charles Pierce was not just a Freemason, but also had a significant position or had considerable respect within this more specific group of Knights Templar. And the mention of 100 Masons officiated at the grave underscores the high regard in which he was held within the Masonic community. He might have been a mover and shaker for all we know. It's common for Masons, by the way, to provide funeral rites for a deceased member and reflecting the strong bonds of brotherhood and support among members extending beyond death. This one stands out simply because of the number of people there. I mean, over 800 people died on July 24th or close to that time because of the Eastland, and yet they were able to find this many people, 100 people, to officiate at Charles Pierce's ceremony. So that's fascinating to me. This is one of those topics that definitely deserves more research and more study. The next obituary is that of John Sweden. That's Swedin. Wait till you hear this one. Sweden, John, 47 years old, 1910 South Hamlin Avenue, the foreman of the woodworking department in the Western Electric Company. He was the sole support of 3 minor children, Ellen, Elmer, and Effie. Mr. Sweden had been with the Western Electric Company for 18 years and was one of its oldest Chicago employees. He was a member of the William B. Warren Lodge, number 209, AF and AM, and of a German secret order. Services were held Tuesday from the above address. Interment was at Montrose Cemetery. Okay, let's start with the easy stuff. So the William B. Warren Lodge that John was a member of would have been a Freemason lodge. The AF and AM stands for the Ancient, Free, and Accepted Masons, which is a worldwide fraternity that's been around for a long time, known for its secret rituals, symbols, and a focus on moral and ethical improvement, charity, and community service. Now, the thing that got to me was when I read that John was a member of a German secret order. Oh, for goodness sake, what was that? I did some searching in newspapers, various newspapers, and I think I found the German secret order. This is from the November 26, 1910 Chicago Tribune. Again, that's 5 years before the Eastland disaster. Let me read the article. It's actually just a brief snippet. Headline, not for profit. Concordia Pleasure Club, Chicago, social, incorporators, Edward William Neuffer, John Sweden, that's our John Sweden, and William Dietzel. Here's what stopped me in my tracks. If you've listened to this podcast, you know that I was raised and influenced by my mother's faith and ethnic tradition of German Lutheran Missouri Synod. And so we attended Concordia Church when I was a child, and later on I attended one of the Concordia colleges in Ann Arbor when I was a teenager. And one of my best friend's fathers was the pastor of yet another Concordia church. I know of Concordia Publishing House because, again, Missouri Synod. And I've heard Concordia in many contexts, but never in my life have I heard Concordia and pleasure in one sentence. So I thought, what the heck is that about? Here's what my research uncovered. So the Concordia Pleasure Club, as mentioned in the 1910 Chicago Tribune, sounds like it was one of the many social clubs that were popular in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, especially in places like Chicago. And these clubs were formed for various purposes, primarily focusing on social, cultural, and recreational activities. And the not-for-profit description indicates that it was established as a non-commercial organization, likely aimed at providing its members with a space for social interaction, entertainment, and perhaps cultural enrichment without the aim of generating profit. I was unable to find any more about the Concordia Pleasure Club, but you know what? It's somewhere. So it'll just take a little more digging. That is kind of a theme of all of this. We scratch the surface or touch the surface, sometimes going a little deep. But this right here is raw material to start exploring the depths of what this was all about. The question I have as I'm in the middle of this research is, at the turn of the 20th century, why were there so many of these types of fraternal organizations, social organizations, etc.? And more or less on the surface, they sounded like they were engaged in the same types of supportive activities. And I'm not talking about the secret rituals and things like that, but for the most part, they were active in the community. They wanted to support their communities and they wanted to contribute. And there were so many. And what was that all about? And also, did they work at cross purposes? I don't know. I'm guessing that they did at some point. Was there a competition? Well, there were human beings there, right? So where there's human beings, there's competition, sometimes friendly, sometimes not so much. So I'm sure that there was so much going on with this. But again, sometimes by beginning this conversation, you can go into different directions and to some more in-depth research, which I will do because I did not expect all this either. And if I find anything else about the Concordia Pleasure Club, I'm going to let you know. But that's what that was all about. Finally, the Ristow brothers. I've saved the most complicated for last. And I've shared the story of the Ristow brothers. In fact, William and Herman Ristow are the reasons that I'm doing this Eastland Chronicles series. And if you want to listen to that episode, it was broadcast on November 4th, 2023. And I'll put a link to that episode as well in the show notes. And I went into detail about their lives then, and I'm not going to do that now. But I'll give you a high-level summary of their lives. They worked for Western Electric and both died. William was married with several little daughters, and Herman was engaged to be married. And I'm going to read just a portion of their obituary. And this is from a smaller publication, a community publication called Forest Leaves from 1915. Title is Ristow Brothers. William F. and Herman A. Jr. are among the victims of the Eastland. William F. Ristow of 939 Lathrop Avenue, Forest Park, and Herman A. Ristow, Jr. of Oak Park, sons of Mr. and Mrs. Herman A. Ristow, were among the employees of the Western Electric Company who lost their lives in the Eastland Disaster of last Saturday. Then it goes into the discovery and the relatives, etc. But I'm going to get to the funeral part here because this is what stood out for me in this article. A double funeral was held at the Ristow home on Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, conducted by Reverend Mr. Honig, pastor of the German Lutheran Church on Ashland Avenue in the city. The interment was at Waldheim. William was a member of the Circle Masonic Lodge, Herman of the Thomas J. Turner Masonic Lodge, of Atlas Lodge, IOOF, and the Ceres Lodge of the Rebeccas. The Oddfellows and Rebeccas were represented in the rites at the house, and the Masonic bodies held their ritual at the cemetery. The floral tributes were many and beautiful. So I'm going to stop there because the article does go on for a while, but there's so many things in that paragraph. The fact that their Lutheran pastor was there, And I'm honestly not sure which German Lutheran church they're referring to. There were a couple suspects, and I need to keep narrowing that down because it's not conclusive in the history that I'm looking at. The story of the Ristau brothers and their involvement in various lodges and the Lutheran Church paints a vivid picture of the intricate tapestry of community and fraternal bonds that shaped their lives. William was the member of the Circle Masonic Lodge, while Herman belonged to the Thomas J. Turner Masonic Lodge, the Atlas Lodge of the Independent Order of Oddfellows, IOOF, and the Ceres Lodge of the Rebeccas. These people were busy, right? These affiliations showcase the brothers' deep engagement with the principles of moral development, charity, and community services that these organizations embodied. The funeral rites for the Ristau brothers powerfully illustrate the integration of their fraternal memberships into the commemoration of their lives. The Oddfellows and the Rebeccas participated in the rites at the house, offering support and honoring their fallen members. The Masonic bodies held their ritual at the cemetery, a poignant symbol of the deceased's journey beyond this life. I want to pause just for a second and say something why this stood out. I mentioned my own Missouri Synod early years from, high school until my early 20s or so. Then after that, I was not involved. But during that time, one of my classmates, who was also a member of our same Lutheran church, she wanted to join a girls' organization, I think that was associated with the Masons. I honestly don't remember. But she went to our pastor to ask if that was okay, and he said no. And the stance was that if you were a member of the Missouri Synod Church at that time, you could not belong to any of these organizations. However, here we have a case of many years before all that took place of these brothers being members of both. So whatever stance an organization had at a high level, on a congregational level, maybe it worked out differently. But that was intriguing to me because I do remember my friend being unable to join this organization. So if you had any relatives or ancestors who were living in the United States during the late 19th, early 20th century, you might find out that they were involved in these types of fraternal organizations. And if you didn't know that, you might be surprised. And if you do find out that you had someone who was involved, you might want to do more research to see how that influenced their lives. I know this has been quite a surprising episode for me. And there's a lot more obituaries, too, where people were involved. I just scratched the surface. And I'll probably revisit this topic again, and by then I'll have more information. But until that time, have a good week, and I will talk to you next week. Hey, that's it for this episode, and thanks for coming along for the ride. Please subscribe or follow so you can keep up with all the episodes. And for more information, please go to my website. That's www.flowerintheriver.com. I hope you'll consider buying my book, available as audiobook, ebook, paperback, and hardcover, because I still owe people money. And that's my running joke. But the one thing I'm serious about is that this podcast and my book are dedicated to the memory of all who experienced the Eastland Disaster of 1915. Goodbye for now.